Vince McMahon gets fined $400,000 for car crash from reckless driving. Vince McMahon fined $400,000 for reckless driving. What really happened? WWE's most controversial figure is back in the headlines, and this time, it's not about wrestling. In this video, we break down the shocking details behind Vince McMahon's $400,000 fine following a multi-car crash allegedly caused by reckless driving. Just hours before the tragic news of Hulk Hogan's reported passing, Vince found himself at the center of another legal storm. Was it just an accident, or is there more to the story? It was a Tuesday morning like any other until it wasn't. The streets of Stamford, Connecticut had just begun to stir when the sound of screeching tires, shattered glass, and twisting metal shattered the usual tranquility. Witnesses say it was like something out of a movie. A black SUV swerving at an abnormal speed, clipping the side of a delivery truck, spinning out of control, and slamming into two parked sedans before finally coming to a halt, crushed, smoking, and still. The man pulled from behind the wheel wasn't just anybody. It was Vince McMahon. Yes, that Vince McMahon, the billionaire wrestling magnate, the face of WWE's most explosive eras, and a man who's been at the center of more scandals than the squared circle has seen championships. But this wasn't kayfabe. This wasn't a scripted stunt for ratings. This was real. And it had consequences. Within 48 hours, local authorities confirmed that McMahon would be fined $400,000 for reckless driving, with additional citations reportedly pending. The incident, though initially buried under other breaking news, including the unconfirmed reports surrounding Hulk Hogan's sudden passing, quickly spiraled into its own media storm. As questions mounted, theories flourished. Was McMahon under the influence? Was he running from something, or perhaps driving towards something in a fit of fury? Why wasn't this story leading every headline? The silence from WWE was deafening. For decades, Vince McMahon has styled himself as untouchable. From steroid scandals to hush money payouts, from backstage brawls to boardroom betrayals, he's endured it all. But this felt different. The police report didn't mince words: reckless endangerment, failure to maintain lane, and gross negligence behind the wheel. And while no lives were lost, the crash left 3 others with minor injuries, including a retired schoolteacher whose Honda Civic was totaled in the collision. According to eyewitness reports obtained by Stamford Today, McMahon was seen arguing on his phone minutes before the crash. One woman, who lives just 2 blocks from the scene, claimed she saw him gripping the wheel, red-faced, shouting at someone over Bluetooth. Another said she heard tires squeal moments before the SUV barreled through the intersection. The vehicle? A customized Cadillac Escalade with bulletproof windows and a reinforced undercarriage, a vehicle fit for someone who's both paranoid and powerful. But what drove Vince McMahon to the edge that morning? Insiders say this wasn't just a bad day. This was the fallout of a storm that had been brewing behind WWE's closed doors for months. And for once, Vince wasn't in control of the narrative. Sources close to WWE management suggest that the crash came just hours after McMahon received devastating internal news. Allegedly, one of WWE's top sponsors, longtime partner Gatorade, had begun pulling its advertising support, citing ongoing ethical concerns tied to previous allegations. Add to that the sudden collapse of merger talks between WWE and a major streaming platform, and you begin to see the cracks forming in Vince's carefully curated empire. But that wasn't the only trigger. What many don't know is that just 2 days before the crash, McMahon had been served a private subpoena tied to an ongoing civil investigation, details of which remain sealed. Those close to him describe a man spiraling. Staffers reportedly saw him pacing backstage at WWE HQ, muttering to himself, slamming doors, and lashing out during production meetings. He was volatile, one anonymous employee told us. You could feel the pressure radiating off him. And when Vince is under pressure, things break. Including, it seems, traffic laws. Despite the severity of the crash, McMahon was not hospitalized. Miraculously, he escaped with only a fractured wrist and bruised ribs. But what followed was a different kind of injury, a wound to his already tarnished reputation. Within hours, news outlets scrambled to cover the story. Yet, WWE remained tight-lipped. No tweets, no press releases, not even a statement from Triple H or Nick Khan. Silence became the strategy. But the internet doesn't wait. By the following morning, hashtags like #McMahonCrashCoverUp and #VinceOnTheRun were trending on X. Photos of the crumpled SUV leaked online, taken by a passerby who recognized the WWE CEO and sold the pictures to a UK tabloid. The images were stark. Glass sprayed like shrapnel across the pavement. The airbag deployed, stained red. The rear left tire folded under the weight of the impact. And there, in the middle of the chaos, Vince McMahon being escorted into a black, unmarked vehicle, shielding his face from the cameras. But why was a billionaire mogul driving himself at all? For someone of Vince's stature, personal drivers, private security, and discretion are standard. So when video emerged showing McMahon exiting WWE HQ alone just 20 minutes prior to the accident, without an escort, it raised more questions. Was he intentionally avoiding staff? Or had he dismissed his usual handlers for reasons known only to him? One possible explanation emerged through court filings that quickly followed the incident. According to documents reviewed by legal analyst Tanya Fields, McMahon's legal team negotiated a quiet settlement with two of the victims, with confidentiality clauses baked into the agreement. The $400,000 fine may only be the surface. Some believe the real cost will be felt behind the scenes in insurance hikes, legal liabilities, and crumbling trust from investors already wary of McMahon's checkered legacy. Behind the scenes, WWE executives were thrown into panic mode. A crisis team was assembled. Damage control became the priority. Pre-taped interviews were scrubbed from upcoming Raw and SmackDown episodes, reportedly to avoid any appearances of McMahon that might trigger backlash. Staff meetings were rescheduled. Non-disclosure agreements were reinforced. And yet, Vince remained defiant. According to one board member who asked to remain anonymous, McMahon refused to acknowledge the incident during an emergency shareholder call. When asked directly if his behavior would impact WWE's public image, Vince reportedly leaned into the microphone and said, flatly, "It won't. We move on." But not everyone agreed. Sponsors, still shaken from previous PR debacles involving hush money scandals and misconduct allegations, were less forgiving. One major apparel company, who had just finalized a new line of WWE merchandise, reportedly suspended their campaign. Others have begun reevaluating their ties to WWE leadership, particularly with McMahon still looming in the executive structure, despite previous attempts to position Triple H and Stephanie McMahon as the new, more palatable faces of the brand. And let's not forget the timing. The crash occurred mere hours before the wrestling world was rocked by reports of Hulk Hogan's sudden passing. Whether coincidence or cosmic irony, the juxtaposition was haunting. Two of wrestling's most iconic figures making headlines, one in memorial, the other in disgrace. For longtime fans, it felt like a symbolic unraveling. The era of old-school wrestling kings, once untouchable, now exposed and eroding under modern scrutiny. As details trickled out, one chilling piece of surveillance footage surfaced. Captured from a traffic camera at the intersection of Atlantic Street and Broad, it shows Vince's SUV blowing through a yellow light, nearly clipping a mother walking her child in a stroller. She yanks the child back just in time. Frame by frame, the footage paints a terrifying picture, one that, had it ended differently, might have led to far graver charges than a six-figure fine. Local residents were outraged. One community organizer told Channel 8 News, if it had been anyone else, any regular citizen, they'd be behind bars by now. Vince McMahon gets a fine. That's not justice. That's celebrity immunity. Others called for a full investigation into whether the Stamford Police Department gave McMahon preferential treatment. The department has denied any such claims, stating that standard procedures were followed and that McMahon was subjected to a field sobriety test, which he passed. Still, the question lingers. Was this just a man having a bad day? Or is Vince McMahon, a man who's long believed the rules don't apply to him, finally losing control of his empire, one scandal at a time? Former WWE stars have begun speaking out. One former talent, who worked under McMahon during the 90s, posted a cryptic message on Instagram: "The mask always slips." Eventually, another tweeted, "This isn't news. This is just Vince being Vince. It was always a matter of time." And yet, there are others who still defend him. WWE loyalists who believe Vince remains a genius, a misunderstood titan unfairly targeted by cancel culture and media vultures. "He made wrestling what it is," one fan posted. "You can't erase that because of a car crash." But this story isn't about erasing legacies. It's about accountability. It's about what happens when power becomes a shield, and whether that shield has finally cracked. In the coming weeks, Vince McMahon will be expected to appear at a formal court hearing, though some insiders suggest he may send legal representation in his place. A calculated move, no doubt, one that fits the pattern of a man who always believes he can rewrite the script, even when life writes its own. But this time, the crowd isn't cheering. This time, the boos are deafening. And somewhere, behind the curtain, a 78-year-old titan of industry sits in a room filled with silence, scrolling through headlines he can't control, surrounded by a company he no longer fully owns, haunted by a world he helped build, and might be watching fall apart. Inside WWE's Stamford headquarters, the aftermath of the crash wasn't just legal. It was psychological. Staffers moved differently. Hushed conversations filled corridors. Longtime producers avoided direct eye contact with McMahon. An unmistakable tension settled like fog across the creative and corporate offices. One former PR executive described it as a cold sweat across the building, as if everyone realized the emperor had no brakes, literally. But Vince McMahon wasn't a man used to being questioned, much less held accountable. And yet, this wasn't the early 2000s anymore. WWE no longer operated as a rogue empire under a single iron fist. Following the company's merger with TKO Group Holdings and the increasing presence of board members from Endeavor, McMahon's every move was being scrutinized not just by wrestling fans, but by Wall Street. And Wall Street doesn't like bad press. The Monday following the crash, WWE stock opened noticeably lower. Analysts attributed the dip to executive volatility, a coded phrase meant to soften what was already becoming a harsh truth: Vince McMahon was now a liability. Emails leaked from within WWE's internal Slack channels suggested that departments had been warned not to publicly comment on the crash without explicit legal clearance. Even talent was kept in the dark. Several superstars, including Roman Reigns and Seth Rollins, reportedly found out about the crash through social media, not through official communication. One source claimed that a major superstar had to cancel an interview last minute, fearing that questions would shift from their storyline to Vince's real-life wreck. This wasn't just a scandal, it was a contagion. Behind the scenes, Vince reportedly summoned a select group of executives to his private office just days after the crash. A plush suite lined with mahogany, championship belts, and relics of WWE's glory days. He sat at the head of the table, arm in a sling, wrist heavily wrapped, defiance still burning in his eyes. According to one executive who spoke under condition of anonymity, McMahon's first words were, "We don't flinch. This isn't our first war." But this war wasn't like the others. Because this time, Vince McMahon was the villain outside the ring. Legal analysts dissected the fine, pointing out its magnitude was rare for a first-time reckless driving charge, especially for a non-DUI incident. But prosecutors had pushed hard. One insider with knowledge of the legal proceedings suggested that the fine had been strategically inflated, meant to send a message: fame does not place you above the law. But even as legal machinery moved forward, the narrative online twisted into chaos. YouTube commentators began to speculate wildly. Some claimed the crash was staged, a convenient distraction from the Hulk Hogan reports. Others suggested darker conspiracies. Secret arguments between Vince and high-ranking WWE officials, a botched attempt to flee the country, or even health-related concerns that compromised his ability to drive safely. One Reddit thread went viral alleging that McMahon had been spotted arguing with Paul Levesque, Triple H, just 48 hours prior to the accident. Another fan claimed to have overheard McMahon talking about being pushed out of creative decisions and losing his grip on the product he built. Whatever the truth, the damage was real and measurable. Insurance documents revealed that McMahon's vehicle was not only custom outfitted for executive security, but also insured under a commercial liability plan shared by WWE. That alone raised eyebrows. If WWE corporate funds were tied to the vehicle and the accident stemmed from personal recklessness, could WWE's shareholders demand internal review? Attorneys have started asking that very question. A formal complaint was filed with the Connecticut Secretary of State's office, requesting a review of WWE's liability structure and whether shareholder funds had been inappropriately used to cover damage, legal fees, or settlements stemming from the crash. While no action has been taken yet, the complaint triggered an internal audit. Suddenly, what began as a single crash began to ripple across the entire WWE business model. And at the center of it all, Vince. A man increasingly seen as a ghost haunting his own creation. WWE had long tried to distance its new image from the old-school tactics that made McMahon infamous. The PG era. The women's evolution. The shift towards cinematic storytelling and social media integration. All part of a concerted effort to modernize the brand. But when Vince's name trends, it always drags the past back with it. Fans didn't forget. They never do. Clips from the infamous limo explosion storyline began recirculating online. Side by side with footage of his real crash. Memes joked that maybe this time, it wasn't scripted. Podcasters revisited past controversies, from the steroid trials in the 90s, to the hush money allegations of 2022, to the countless bizarre promos where Vince blurred the line between villain and CEO. It was as if the crash reignited everything WWE had tried to bury. And yet, in true McMahon fashion, he refused to hide. Just a week after the incident, Vince made a surprise appearance backstage at Monday Night Raw. Not for a segment. Not for a promo. Just presence. He walked the hallways with his usual gait, slower now, perhaps, but still defiant. Staffers described a surreal atmosphere. Some looked away. Others greeted him with forced nods. No one asked about the crash. No one dared. But that didn't mean they weren't thinking it. What if someone had been killed? What if the situation escalated further? What if this time, WWE couldn't spin their way out? According to one former executive, the company is preparing for all possibilities. A succession plan has reportedly been revised. TKO Holdings is said to be finalizing contingency scripts in case public backlash forces McMahon's final exit. Some say the $400,000 fine was a warning shot. Others believe it was merely the beginning. Meanwhile, the people injured in the crash remain silent. Legally silenced. According to Stamford court records, both non-WWE victims of the crash have signed non-disclosure agreements as part of their financial settlement. One of them, an elderly woman, was described as deeply shaken, but physically okay by her attorney. Attempts to reach the victims for comment have been met with silence. But silence speaks volumes. Because even if Vince pays his fine, signs a check, and disappears into the marble hallways of WWE HQ, the image is already cemented. A powerful man behind the wheel of a luxury SUV, blinded by stress or arrogance or rage. Plowing through lives, both figuratively and literally. And what does that say about the future of WWE? Can a company built on spectacle survive the spectacle of its own creator crashing in real time? WWE's current leadership, including Nick Khan and Triple H, have reportedly been holding private sessions with sponsors, assuring them of strict internal reviews and a commitment to ethical leadership. But sponsors are skeptical. One executive at a major soft drink company reportedly asked, "What's the point of building a new era if the old one keeps knocking down the door?" That's the real question. Because Vince McMahon's car may have stopped, but the momentum of his missteps continues. And as of now, the road ahead looks darker than ever. As news continued to break and the wreckage from the crash was cleared, both physically and metaphorically, one thing became painfully clear. Vince McMahon was no longer the untouchable emperor of professional wrestling. He was a man under siege. Not from ratings wars, not from rival promotions, but from his own legacy. The day the fine was made public, Vince was seen leaving his Stamford penthouse with a hard-set jaw and dark sunglasses that did little to conceal the stress carved into his face. For decades, he had been the man who set the rules, who decided what fans saw, who got pushed, who got buried, and who made it to WrestleMania. But now, the tables had turned. He was no longer the narrator of the story. He was the story. And the world was watching. Behind the scenes, damage control went into overdrive. PR consultants were flown in from New York. Internal emails urged WWE employees to respect the privacy of all involved parties and reminded them that unauthorized public statements could be grounds for termination. The locker room grew tense. Morale plummeted. For many young superstars, Vince had always been more myth than man. A towering figure who appeared sporadically at guerrilla position, muttered cryptic guidance, and disappeared just as quickly. But now that myth was unraveling. Some described it as watching the walls of a castle begin to crumble. Others said it felt like watching your grandfather get arrested in front of the family. Still, WWE attempted to move forward. SmackDown aired as planned. Storylines resumed. But fans noticed the shift. Social media erupted with calls to retire the old guard and usher in a new era once and for all. Ratings held steady, but the discourse surrounding the brand was anything but stable. Every promo, every backstage interview, every corporate update was filtered through the lens of Vince's crash. And that made recovery imp.